Welcome to Storie di Vita by Francesco. I'm your host, Francesco Volponi, and Storie di Vita, meaning life stories in Italian, is the storytelling of my travels and events of my life's journey. I was born in a house on the hills of Cavi, a small village in the Liguria region of northern Italy. Our house was in Via Romana, the old Roman way, which would take travelers from Rome all the way to the French border, about 200 kilometers to the west. Cavi sits by the Mediterranean Sea, and those waters had an important role in my life. I'm sure that when I was born, I must have smelled the sea salt rising up the hill carried by the sea breeze. It must have been so because I absolutely fell in love with the sea. The sea is life. It lets you in. It embraces you. It wraps around you. You become one with it. And this is where my story begins, on the hills by the sea. So get comfortable, sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy my stories. Welcome to I Was Born Unexpectedly, episode 1 of Storie di Vita, Life Stories by Francesco. So we'll start this story about the time that I met with my father. It was about midwinter. It was a pale sunny afternoon, and I had traveled to Italy in the off-season to get away from my stressful life. Everything in those days seems to go wrong. I needed time out from it, and often I did so by going to Italy, back to my roots. And so I was sitting in my dad's bedroom in his living area. At that time, he was 90 years old, and yet he was as sharp as ever. And at that particular time, his mind was absorbed in long-gone memories, a natural occurrence for a man his age. As usual, I would just sit there quietly, listening to his stories of the past. Sometimes, if I found the event interesting or family-related, I would interject a question or a comment, but for the most part, he would be doing the talking. I would just be peacefully enjoying being with him, being with my dad, savoring precious moment together. And then, out of the blue, he said, Mammina, which is how we call my mother, it means little mom in Italian. Mammina and I, when you were born, were surprised. We didn't expect you. Boom. It was like something dropped in the room, like a bomb. Did I hear just right? Did my father just say that I was not wanted? As I tried to wrap my head about what he was saying, he continued, and he said, I'm not saying that we didn't want you. Is that we were surprised. She was 45 years old. We didn't think she could get pregnant anymore. And I was 49, not planning to have a fifth child. So you were born unexpectedly. Okay, I thought, this is a little better. I could sense that my father was weighing his words carefully. He was aware of what he was saying that had just, a huge impact on me. And but at the same time, I'm sure he was aware that at my age, 40 at that time, be able to handle it, to be able to manage what he was just sharing with me. Now, he was known for having poor tactful qualities, always a little bit heavy and strong in his approach. But I felt that he was really trying his best to share this news in the most delicate and loving way. And to think that he kept all of this inside for all these years, and then now he is finally able to share this huge piece of information, this huge fact. And it was the most delicate and intimate moment between us. So I wanted to ease that discomfort. So jokingly I said, I'm glad you waited all these years to share this with me. At 40, I can take it, manage it. If you had dropped this bomb on me when I was a teenager, I tell you, it would have messed me up big time. So we both laughed. And then, he continued saying, really, it isn't that we didn't want you, because we did. He said there was something very sweet. I will never forget your dark, bright eyes staring at me as soon as you were in your mother's arms. It was just a surprise, that's all. He said all this with lots of love and concern for my feelings. I smiled at him, I leaned over, and I gave him a big hug. Yes, Papa, I know. I never felt unwanted. You and Mamina gave me lots of love and affection. You taught me that to love and give love is a priority in life. I am glad I was a surprise. I turned out to be a pleasant surprise, didn't I? I said. He nodded and he hugged me tighter. So unexpectedly, that is a very key word in life. That's how life unfolds. Life is made of a continuum of events, and not one of them can be foreseen or guaranteed to happen. We often say, and pardon my language, we often say shit happens, right? Yes, it does. And I often think about people who live a life thinking that they are in control or that they can have control of life and of people. I think it's one of the most ridiculous approaches to life. There is no control. All we can control better, all that we can do is manage how we react to the unexpected events of life. There is a saying that life is a river. Well, it truly is. It flows regardless. We can swim against the current or to swim with the current, to go with the flow. And I'm not saying this to encourage a passive attitude towards life. To the contrary, I'm saying this as a very active, even proactive approach to life. Being aware that we do not control the flow allows us to learn to swim within it. We learn to avoid the rapids, the rocks, the floating logs, and we enjoy the ride. Now, one may say, well, how is this done? I believe that by expanding our awareness, our conscious awareness, by treasuring our experiences and learning from them, and by doing practical spiritual techniques to expand our awareness, we can achieve a greater view and vision of life. And to expand our awareness, we need to expand the container, our conscious mind, our heart, our intellect. Day after day, we're bombarded with outer inputs through the senses. This is usually an overload for the mind, for the intellect, for the heart, for the entire nervous system. It causes stress and tensions. Therefore, it becomes necessary to reverse this outer stroke of attention. It becomes necessary to have a time where our attention is directed inwardly. Now, we all are familiar with the word karma. Karma is sometimes a misused and misunderstood word. Karma actually means action. Karma is the end result of our feelings, desires, thoughts, words, and action. Newton's third law of motion simply states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. If we throw a ball against the wall, that ball is going to bounce back right at us. So I'm using this law of physics to offer a simple analogy to better understand karma. Now, another great saying is we reap what we sow. It tells us the same truth. It implies that the things we do will eventually return back to us, whether it's good or bad. Our decision to reverse our attention inwardly reduces the bad and increases the good. Now, we will have opportunity to talk about this subject in next episodes. But for now, let's go back to the story. Let's travel back to the 50s. I can say that my early years of life were great. Ours was a loving family. We all loved and respected each other. The 50s were a time of simple living, a time for renewal after the dark years of World War II. And Cavi, where I was born, was settled, peaceful. Whenever possible, I would be outdoors. In Via Romana, which is the Roman way that goes from Rome all the way to France, was our playground, and the woods in the hills as well, or sometimes when the weather was fair enough, on the beach. There was a lot of kids living around Via Romana, and the church was a gathering point of sorts. The small piazza in front of the church was actually our soccer pitch, our soccer field. The door of the church, the goal, the door had these two thick marble columns on each side, and they made perfect posts. The church, like many others in Liguria, was perched on the hill. Now, the great Italian Nobel laureate, poet Eugenio Montale, in his poem Liguria, described them as such. O chiese, come navi disposte a essere varate. O churches, like ships ready to be launched. They were all looking like ships because they were right perched on the edge of a hill usually, looking at the Mediterranean down below. Now, the Via Aurelia, which is the main thoroughfare, ran right below the piazza, and the church being so close to the edge posed a threat for us players because too strong of a kick of the ball in the wrong direction, and the ball would fall down towards the road. Now, cars were scarce in those days, and although they were a danger, the greater danger was the fact that the road went steeply downhill to the right. So whomever kicked the ball down had to rush like a madman down the steps to the road, check for cars, spot the ball, roll in, and chase it as fast as possible before they would begin to roll down towards the train station, or worse, towards the path leading to the beach, which was an even steeper run. Sometimes cars would solve the problem by running over the ball and smashing it to shreds. Problem solved. Now, down the danger was Beppe. Beppe was a burly man whose house was on the piazza of the church, and at times, if he was taking a nap, he would burst out of his house enraged, with a knife in his hands, grab the ball and punch holes in it. To the great disappointment, of course, of us all, but especially of the poor kids who owned the ball. We really didn't like Beppe. I mean, we thought that his temper was a little bit excessive. He could have come out with some nice words, even though he would be mad. And I think he would told us kindly and gently, maybe he would have listened more carefully rather than be upset and do what he did. Now, of course, we were not always angels, so we probably never was angels. One of the things that we did when we were bored and there was no soccer playing, not enough players, or just you want to do something else, or there was no ball around, we would just always try to find something else to do. And one of the things that we did was to ring somebody's doorbell and then run and hide. We did this often, actually, and the people we picked were always the same one. Eventually, they got fed up with us and decided to chase us. It just happened, unfortunately for me, that the one time I was running away late and I found no good place to hide. And the man whose door we rang the bell easily spotted me. He came over, grabbed me by the ear, and dragged me all the way to his door. And he proceeded to bang my head a few times, not too hard, against the door, saying, "You like to knock the door? Here, knock on the door." Bang, bang went my noggin. Meanwhile, my accomplices had come out of hiding and were all around watching the scene and laughing like vile traitors. So I didn't ring bells anymore. So this habit of ringing doorbells was sharpened later on by a brilliant trick by our friend Mauro. We were playing on the dusty road in front of the house of this older couple. And Mauro said, let's ring their doorbell. Immediately I said, no way. No, I don't want to do that. I got enough knocking for myself. But he insisted. He said, let's ring the bell, but not run. Instead, let's sit right back here and continue to play. When they come out and ask who rang the bell, we will tell them that some bad kids did it and then ran. We all look at each other intrigued. We thought, this could work. It could be fun. So we approached the door and rang the bell twice, and instead of running for our lives, we squatted back on the dusty road and continued to play peacefully. After a while, the door opened. Old woman came out, looked right and left. She saw nobody else around but us, and she asked if we knew who had rung the bell. We nodded and said, yeah, we saw some older kids doing it, and they ran fast that way, pointing somewhere down the road. She shook her head in disappointment, and then the unexpected happened. She said, you boys are so good, playing peacefully. You deserve a prize. Wait, she said. She went back inside, and then she came back out with candies for everybody. We couldn't believe our luck. We felt a mix of joy and guilt. I guess Mauro had concocted the perfect crime. And back in those days, we knew nothing about karma. We had no awareness of consequences for our actions. Ignorance was bliss. So life continued on like that in my childhood, simple and contained within those defined boundaries of Via Romana for the most part. Now, when the soccer game consisted of too many players to be played on the small church piazza, the game moved to the side of the church. We would use the Via Romana as the pitch. Jackets would be placed on the ground at each end of the road and act as a post for the goals. The length of the church building would be the length of the playing field. There was no danger of kicking the ball to the road down below, and we had the church on one side and houses on the other, so it was protected. Problem was, when somebody would kick a very high kick, the ball would end up on the roof of one of the houses. Game over. Tears for the owner of the ball. But then one day, Bruno, one of the older kids, said that he could climb on the roof and retrieve the balls. Actually, the balls. Because by now, there were 3, 4, 5 balls up there. So Bruno proceeded to climb up the branches of an olive tree next to the house that had the balls on the roof. His skinny body going from branch to branch until he reached the tallest branch, about 20 feet up, and courageously hopped onto the roof. Balls started falling down like apples from a tree. I recognized one of my own balls, so I grabbed it, happy to have it back in my possession. Well, Bruno had come down by then, and not so fast, he said. All the balls are mine now, he said. I went to get them, risking my neck, he said, and with that, he snatched the ball out of my hands. The same fate happened to all the other kids whose balls he had recovered. Bruno walked away ceremonially with his prized possessions, and the game ended. And that was it for the soccer balls. So, Cavi is a small town. Like I said, it's a very small little village on the Mediterranean. But in the summer, the population probably doubles with tourist arrival. But for the rest of the year, during the fall and winter, it's made up of people who practically know each other, even more so back in those days. Despite this, Cavi was highly divided. The kids of Old Cavi, which is down by the beach where the fishermen are, and us up on the hill by the church did not get along sometimes. And this would manifest in confrontations. Now, it was during one of our soccer games by the side of the church that the most intense battle occurred. So what we had in case of attacks, some of the younger kids who didn't play soccer were assigned to guard the territory, so to speak, make sure that there were no enemies coming. The younger one of us who did play were assigned to ammunitions collections, and the ammunitions were very hard green olives. The older kids had the weapons, slingshots. We were perfectly organized in case of an attack. So we were happily playing a lively game when we heard the scouting kids yell, "Old Covey is coming, Old Covey is coming." And they were running back towards us, seeking refuge. So my group, which was the weapon collectors, immediately ran into the olive groves to pick green olives. We filled our pockets with as many olives as we could and brought them back to the older kids. Now down the road, an army of angry and loud kids from Old Covey had appeared. They were brandishing their slingshots, and they were waving their arms with their fists tightly squeezed, ready for battle. Now, our weaponized soldiers lined up across the street and waited for the enemy to come within shooting range. Suddenly, a rain shower of cypress nuts dropped over our heads. Now, cypress nuts are large, but they're hollow, and although they're sort of woodsy, they're not really hard and they're not painful. So that's what their weapon were. So that was a mistake, because the reply from our side came rapidly. A storm of fast-flying, painful, and hard green olives fell upon them as a ton of bricks. And we could hear the moaning of pain all around, and before they could even realize what hit them, bam, another round left our side slings and blasted the enemy once again. Whining in pain, the enemy made a fast retreat and disappeared down the road and never showed itself again. Victory was ours. So, going up in years, grade school was lived right across from the church. An old house had been the school for forever, I believe. Bedrooms turned into classrooms, windows facing the blue, shimmering sea. Life was easy and blissful. Innocence prevailed and wrapped all sides of life back then. It was really a blissful time. But eventually I grew up. My family moved down from the hills in Via Romana to give a better access to my father's patients. Middle school was in Lavagna, the next town west of Covey. They were 3 unpleasant years. I had probably the only unpleasant years in school. I had no connection with my teachers whatsoever. So the 3rd year, my parents pulled me out of school and sent me to a private evening school to prepare me for the final exams. And so to get as far away from school in Lavagna, they sent me to Tuscany, to my uncle, to Larderello, which is a thermal energy location in the middle of the hills in Tuscany. And my uncle was a big shot engineer for the company there. And I loved it there. It was great, so different from Covey. Such a different energy and vibration Tuscany has versus Liguria, different personalities. Ligurians are closed and not open, but Tuscans are more friendly and open. And additionally, the town had a pool and beautiful soccer field, a movie theater, but especially cute girls. I was barely 13, 14, but I met Christina. Christina was 18 already, and she was simply beautiful. Tall, blonde, she was gorgeous.
Naturally, ours was a completely platonic romance. She was aware of my young age, and I was aware of her older age. Nonetheless, I fell deeply in love with her. I'm not sure what she felt for me, but I knew she liked me, and she always came around with another friend just to be safe. We took walks. We sat on the stone wall looking down to the town at sunset. It lasted the entire time I was there for my exams. But once I finished my school exam, I was sent back home, and I never saw her again. Goodbye, Christina. It was the beginning of the romance in life. I turned out to be a full one. Lots of romantic experiences. And then I started high school in Chiavari, which is another town even further west than Lavagna. And my life began to take a more mature shape. The innocence of the early years slowly disappearing. Very fast, very quickly. In the morning, to go to school, all the students of the neighboring towns will find themselves jammed into the same old bus going to Chiavari. And the bus had a hierarchy structure. Older kids stood in the back platform, younger one in the middle and front, and I quickly graduated to the back crowd. We all gather in small clusters, depending on classes and type of school. Italy had at that time more than one type of high school. And we would chat about stuff and smoke a cigarette while chatting. The back of the bus was wrapped in a cloud of smoke. We, totally unaware of the dangers to our lungs. Now, my best friend Roberto and I always hung together. Fridays were a long school day, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with a short break for lunch spent on the school grounds. Eventually, Roberto and I devised a perfect escape plan. So we would ride the bus in the morning as usual, but once in Chiavari, instead of going to school, we would have to train for La Spezia, about an hour away, and then a bus to Porto Venere, at the very tip of the Gulf of La Spezia, also known as the Gulf of Poets, because of Shelley and Byron living in the past in that area. Now, Porto Venere means Port of Venus. It's a delightful, all small fishing town at the very tip of the coast. In front of it is the island of Palmaria, a large rock protecting the Gulf, and then the town of Porto Venere with old fishing buildings all around facing the sea. So Roberto and I would walk all the way to the tip of the land where it sat this ancient church called San Pietro, dating back to, I believe, 1100s. Now, San Pietro sits on the high rock facing the Gulf of Poets, and it is a beautiful church. And so Roberto and I would just go there. We would lay our bodies on the warm rocks and soak in the splendid Ligurian sun. We would, of course, bought our lunch in town, fresh bread, cheese, prosciutto, and whatever else we would find in Porto Venere that triggered our appetite. So we just hung out for the day, and our escape was so perfectly orchestrated that by the time we got back to Chiavari, or better yet, Lavagna, the train station, we would get off the train and walk out on the street and catch the same bus where all the other students were coming back from school, going back home. It was a perfect timing. So nothing looked out of place. Now, Roberto had the ability to forge my mother's signature perfectly. So he would write a short note to the school excusing me for my absence. Now, unfortunately, what happened is that one time I got sick for real, and I stayed home, and my mother had to write me an excuse. So the next day when I went to school, I presented my excuse to the principal's office, and then after a little while, I was called into the principal's office. She placed my mother's note in front of me and said, "This is not your mother's signature. It's a fake one." I smiled inside myself and I said to myself, "No, lady. I thought this is my mother's signature. The others were fake." So I reassured her that it was not a fake. "Okay," she said, "we will call your mother then." "Go ahead," I said. Of course, my mother confirmed the validity of the signature, and I was released from the principal's clause. So probably once I got back home from school, as usual, my lunch was there ready for me. My mom sat across the table, waiting for me to finish my food. And when I was done, she said, "Okay, tell me what's going on." "Nothing," I said. "What do you mean?" "Clearly," she said, "the principal has seen other signatures before that she considers to be real. Who is the master forger?" I knew at that point that our escapade were done for. Finito. No more. "Roberto," I said, "he's been faking your signatures." Firmly, but sweetly, as always, she was always very sweet. Mother said that was the end of that business. "No more," she said. And humbly, I promised it would be. So thank you for listening to my stories. We will continue in the next episode, where we will share some very interesting and life-forming experiences and the beginning of my travels. So far, my travel has been escaping to Porto Venere, but it's becoming, in the future, a life rich of travels. So again, thank you for listening, and please tune in again next time. Arrivederci.